viewers, my name's Cara, and today I have a review video for you of sorts. This is actually going to be my first impressions review of this item, and I'm planning on doing a full review of it at the end of this calendar year when I am finished working with it for the year. As you can probably tell if I put it in the video's title, I am going to be talking about the 2018 Moon Sign Datebook, so naturally it's a year-long thing. So I want to talk about my first impressions of it now, first getting it, first starting to work with it, and then at the end of the year I'll tell you what came of it. Let's get started. I have some notes here in front of me to make sure that I hit all the points that I wanted to hit and don't ramble for too long about things. There are some tangents that I will probably go on because things within this have stories behind them and opinions that I have about them. I will try not to go too much into that, and I can possibly do other videos on it in the future. But I will be mentioning it, there will be some tangents, just so you're all aware. Without further ado, Llewellyn's 2018 Moon Sign Datebook. This was given to me this year by a friend. Thank you, Lauren. This is something that, and I have shared this with Lauren, who got it for me, that I would not have purchased for myself. I've glanced through them in the witchy shops in the past, and they've never seemed like something for me. So I just leave them be. However, this year I did not purchase for myself the usual planner that I've been working with for the past couple years, the Celtic Mandala planner, which has pagan and Wiccan holidays listed in it and all kinds of other holidays and stuff like that. I didn't get one for myself this year. I was just going to use my calendars. I have this little 2-year pocket planner that I use that only has monthly views. I have a wall calendar and a miniature calendar. I was just going to use those. But then this was a gift. So this is an opportunity for me to take a look at something that I've never felt drawn to before and really give it a chance for a year. And to me, the message of the universe with my friend gifting this to me at this time was a push in the right direction for me to continue my work with one of the courses that I've been developing, which is a moon phase magic related course, and I'll talk more about that at the end. So this is something that I've always kind of had a little bias against, because when I look through it, I think, man, it doesn't look like much, it doesn't look like it's for me. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things about this with first impressions that I am not happy with, not impressed by, but in the end, it is a planner. I am going to use it all year, and I have been making some adjustments to make it fit me. So, let me tell you what I mean. First thing that I wrote down on my list here, I'm going to flip to a month that I haven't started marking things in yet, so we can just look at things, and I know you're not going to be able to see it really nice up close. But, so it has this regular weekly view, right, as most planners do, and it lists the moon sign, the zodiac sign that the moon is in on that day. It lists your void of course times, major holidays. It has a little leaf symbol for days that are good for gardening, a little fish for days that are good for fishing, and it has the major moon phases, like when it reaches the first quarter and the third quarter, the full moon, and the dark moon, which it labels as the new moon. So that's all your basic stuff. Now the first thing I noticed just flipping through was that each day also has first, second, third, or fourth written next to the zodiac sign. And though it does have a symbols key toward the front here, which tells you the astrological glyphs for each of the signs, so you know what symbol means what. And it tells you the symbol for each phase, and that the leaf means days for planting, and the fish means days for fishing. And it tells you that VC means void of course. It also lists the dates of the eclipses, the equinoxes, and solstices, and when Mercury goes retrograde and when it goes direct. But it doesn't tell you anything about what that first, second, third, and fourth means. So it took me a minute to figure this out. And what I have figured out is that it's basically breaking down the entire cycle of the moon into quarters. This makes sense because we know that when the moon is half illuminated the first time in the cycle, we call it the first quarter moon. So that here represents the end of the first quarter of the moon's phase. And then from the first quarter moon to the full moon is the second quarter of the moon's phase. From the full moon to the third quarter moon is the third quarter. And from the third quarter moon or the last quarter moon to the next new moon, the recycling of the phase, is the 4th quarter. So I just figured that out by looking at all the dates and when it changes from 1st to 2nd, 2nd to 3rd, but it doesn't explain that anywhere. So that's the first thing I noticed, is that it's lacking some explanations for some things that are in this. It also says on the back that this is a perfect companion to the best-selling moon sign book. So I've never seen the moon sign book, and I actually didn't know until I just Googled it a little while ago that it is also an annual publication. It's not a book that there are then annual planners to go along with, but it is an annual thing itself, the moon sign book. So I'm assuming it must be similar to like the Witch's Almanac or some of the other almanacs, but I've never seen one myself, so I don't know if any of these things that I'm going to be talking about are further explained in the moon sign book. I am just working with this date book itself as its own thing. So, just so you know. Let me show you some basic stuff here. Let's go back to some basic characteristics of the planner. This is the same picture on every one for this year with the month. And then you have your full monthly view. And then we have, so there's always an at a glance section. It's either at the beginning of the month or the end, and it tells you like, okay, August 11th is going to be a new moon solar eclipse, and it gives you a little, like, their meanings and definitions and recommendations for your magic. Full moon, same thing. That's something that I'm not really going to be using this year, because a lot of these, as I'm reading through them, don't really match what I believe is the energy and the magic of that phase, or, which I will get to a little bit later, the sign that the moon is in. So that's something that I may not necessarily use. I might read them month to month to see what they say and compare it to my own ideas. You know, it's always nice to get other ideas, but for the most part, I haven't liked them very much so far or agreed with them, so I'll probably just let those go. There are also these random things, like this one at the end of August is where did the moon come from? And it's just a little information about the history of where people think the moon originated, where it came from. And there's a little section of planting recommendations for in the garden. And so there's all these little random snippets and tidbits and fun facts and history about the moon phases. The first few in this planner talk about things like the blood red moon, and then in February it talks about the black moon, which I'd never heard of, and somewhere in here it also talks about the blue moon. So the first thing that I noticed when reading those sections is that this uses the popular definitions of all of those terms. For example, the black moon is something that I have never heard of anywhere until this. And when I Googled it, all I could find really was astronomy websites and science websites talking about how the black moon is not a thing in astronomy and astrology. It's something that they don't really know where it came from. In the past few years, some people have just started talking about it and assigning meaning to it. But it actually has, in here, they give it 2 different definitions. And so my first instinct was, what? I've never heard of this. My second reaction was, why are there multiple definitions? Like, why are there multiple definitions for all of these things? Why can't we just come up with one definition of what something is, and then if there's something different that we want to give a special name to, why doesn't it just have a different name? It's so confusing. Well, then when I was looking it up online, turns out there are actually 4 different definitions of it, and I'm including links in the description to this video of numerous articles about the blue moon, original definition versus the popular definition that's listed in here, which most people know, the black moon, stuff that I read about that, and also void of course moons, which I'll talk about in a little bit here in this video, but there are links in the description, so check all that stuff out. And this is where I could make a whole other video about these things, because I have some very strong opinions about these definitions and the way that we assign meaning to things and which ones should be what. But I don't want to take a ton of time in this video doing that. Since that's something that I have a really strong opinion on, obviously, I noticed that and I was like, oh, okay, so this is only giving the popular definitions. So again, thinking of it in terms of, for example, someone brand new to witchcraft, brand new to magic, brand new to working with the moon phases in your magic, which some of you may be if you're watching this video. Looking at something like that, if you were to just read this, you would think that that's what it is. That's it. That's the only information they give you. They don't provide you with the information that there's actually an older definition that was used first, and that this definition was born out of a misunderstanding, and that a lot of people believe that that's what it is now, but it's all due to a misunderstanding. So they don't allow you to have all of that information and make your own choice as to which one you're going to assign meaning to. For me, I do believe that once enough people believe in something and think that it means something, in a way it has meaning. That's a lot of how magic works. When we give energy to something and we believe in something, it creates a bit of significance. So I believe now that the second full moon in a month probably does have some kind of significance because people believe it does, but I don't think it should have been called the same name as a seasonal blue moon. I think it should have been given a different name because it's a different thing. However, I content myself with just differentiating between a seasonal blue moon, which is the one that I recognize, and a monthly blue moon, which is the popular definition that a lot of people talk about. And the same thing here with a black moon. That's not something I'm going to recognize in my practice, and in fact, between the 4 definitions, they're really confusing and contradictory, and I think some of them have merit in certain ways and others don't in other ways. So, again, I can probably make a separate video on that if you want. Just let me know in the comments. The next big thing that I noticed was the void of course times and just everything surrounding that. I am not someone who has ever worked with void of course moons in my practice before, so I didn't know a lot about it. Even though on the Pagan Perspective collaborative channel, someone did ask us to talk about it years ago, but I think it was a subs-week topic, and I didn't do a video on it. And at the time, I didn't use void of course moons. I mean, I still don't. I'm only just now learning about them because of this, because I knew I was going to be doing this review, so I wanted to really know what I'm talking about in these first impressions and give you my real reactions to these things. So I did not look up and start learning about this stuff until I got this. So here's me looking at this and saying, okay, for example, on March 5th, it says that the moon goes void of course at 1:19 a.m. and the sign on that day is Libra. And then the sign the next day is Scorpio. But it doesn't say when the moon entered the sign of Scorpio. So looking at it, one might assume that it meant as soon as Tuesday, midnight on that day, the moon's in Scorpio. But I know better than that. That's not how astrology works. Things don't happen exactly at midnight Eastern time. By the way, this item is printed in Eastern time. So if you are in any other time zone, you would have to adjust for your time zone. So you'd have a little extra work to do. So anyway, it says when it goes void of course, but it doesn't say when it comes back. So I looked it up. That's something I want to know. If I'm looking at this and you're giving me this information, I want to know the rest of that information. And what I found out was that it varies because, again, I didn't know what void of course moon really meant. So I don't know, like, is it a couple hours? Is it a day? How long is it? So what a void of course moon is, also, this is another definition in this planner that is incorrect. So I feel like, again, especially if we're talking about like total beginners to all this stuff, reading this and not doing further research, which a lot of people, especially people watching my channel, you're probably going to do the additional research, but not everyone does. And that's just how some people are. They don't want to do a lot of extra work. You want to know that the thing that you're buying is doing all of that work for you. And so for me, as someone who does like to educate with the little bit that I know and my experience on here, I look at this and I'm like, oh no, I don't want someone who's just learning about these things to read this and think that's all there is, because they're not giving you the correct definitions of things. I'm trying to find it now. It's kind of all over the place. Here we go. It's right in the beginning, under the introduction. It says, void of course times are the periods of time when the moon has left a given moon sign but has yet to enter the next sign. At this time the moon is void and it is not considered a good time to initiate plans. Now, the magical correspondences of void of moon is correct. It talks about how it's not considered a good time to start new things, meet new people, stuff like that. That is true. However, the definition is wrong. The moon does not leave a zodiac sign and then have space before it enters the next one. The void of course time, when that happens, the moon is still in the zodiac sign. And what void of course means, as I've learned by just looking it up, is that as the moon travels through a specific zodiac sign, it comes into specific aspects with the planets that are in that sign. But basically, there are significant aspects and there are non-significant aspects. And when the moon is going through and making significant aspects, meeting these other planets as it goes through, they're considered, significant events. When the moon has met the last planet that it's going to meet while it's in a certain sign, it is then considered void of course until it enters the next sign, because it's not making any other significant connections with other planets in that space of time. So that space of time could be only a couple hours if it meets the last planet very closely to the end of when it's going to leave a sign before, close to the time it's going to make a new one, or it can be like a whole half of a day. It just depends on when it makes the last aspect to the sign, to the planet within the sign that it's in. So it's variable. So I looked it up because I wanted to know when. So I started looking it up online, and again, there are links below to tables and charts and calendars and all kind of things that were really easy to find. There's a ton of them. Some of them that I've listed below actually are already set to Eastern time and also account for daylight savings time. Some of them can be changed to go to different time zones, all kind of things. So check out the links in the description again. But what I was noticing is that the things that are printed here as the sign on each day is not necessarily accurate for the whole day. This might not matter to everyone, but to me, it does. I would want to know this. If I were trying to do a specific magic working and I want to do it when the moon is in a certain sign, I want to know when it's in the sign for the whole day and when it's only in that sign for part of the day. And because they don't list the times that it enters the next zodiac sign, you aren't aware of that, and they're actually printing things a little bit off. So, for example, February 1st is a Thursday. The moon is in Leo when that day starts. At 5:59 a.m. Eastern time, which would be 2:59 a.m. Pacific time, 5:59 a.m. Eastern time, the moon goes void of course in Leo. It's still in the sign of Leo, but it's not going to meet any more planets in a significant aspect until it's out of the sign. So it's still in Leo, but it's not considered a good time to do new things. You could still work with moon in Leo magic on other types of things that aren't starting things, or you could do planning things, following up things, but the moon is still in Leo. It has not left a sign and is now just floating around in space in a void, as the name might suggest, which is what my partner was saying. The name is very confusing. That could be a lot of the reason that people think that it has left one sign and it's floating around in a void of space before it gets into the next sign. But it's actually still in the sign until 2:13 p.m. the moon enters Virgo. Cool. And then the next day, the moon is still in Virgo. Cool. February 3rd, the moon is in Virgo, and then it goes void of course in Virgo at 2:07 a.m. my time. So before I even wake up that day, the moon is void of course, but it's still in Virgo until it enters Libra on the 4th at 4:47 p.m. So almost 5 p.m. the next day is when it enters Libra. But they have Libra listed on that day. But from midnight until 5 p.m. that day, the moon is still void of course in Virgo. It's not in Libra. So that sign being there is a little bit misleading. To give you an example from this month, on January 1st, they have listed that the moon is in Gemini, and the full moon occurs at 9:24 p.m., which is correct, but the moon moved into the sign of Cancer at 3:10 a.m. on the 1st. They have listed Gemini. So if you were looking at this to find out what sign the full moon is in, you might look at that and say, okay, the full moon is at 9:24 and it's in Gemini. But the moon moved into Cancer at 3 a.m. So the full moon at 9:24 p.m. is actually a full moon in Cancer. So it's misleading how they have it written. And again, on January 3rd, they have Cancer written as the sign, but the moon already moved into Leo at 2:22 a.m. my time zone. So again, by the time I wake up that day, the moon is in Leo, but they have Cancer written down. So you might be tempted to think it's going to be in Cancer all day, but it's not. So I think it's a huge oversight on the part of the people who made this planner not to have included the times that the moon enters the next sign and therefore is no longer void of course. Because the way they have it printed, to me it seems like they're just printing whatever sign the moon was in at midnight Eastern Standard Time when that day begins. But that's not the case in the one example that I gave you where it said it was in Libra, because they printed Libra even though it doesn't go into Libra until 5 p.m. Eastern Time that day. So the only reason I can think that they didn't print Virgo was because it was void of course in Virgo before that point, and because the definition they use is that it's in a void space, it's between signs. They saw it as being, you know, oh, it's void of course, so it's not in Virgo anymore, but it's not Libra yet, but it will be Libra later in the day, so we'll just put down Libra. But again, on the other days, you know, like January 22nd, the moon enters Aries at 1:27 a.m., but they still have Pisces written down. So I just don't know what their system was of how they decided to print what sign where, but for me, if I'm going to be trying to use it to work with the moon phase in conjunction with the astrological sign that the moon is in, I want to know that stuff. If you actually cross-reference it, it does have the exact times that it enters and leaves a sign in the gardening tips section, because the tip is specifically for when the moon is in a certain sign. So it lists, like for example, May 7th, 10:09 p.m. to May 8th, 11:11 p.m. when it's in Aquarius. So it does list the exact times there, but not throughout the weekly views themselves. Another thing that I noticed that I really expected when I see something that says this, and again, this could just be based on the work that I do, when I see something with this title, I think it's going to talk about what the moon means when it's in each sign, like what that means for your magic. And it doesn't talk about that at all. It does list the signs, and as I've just said, somewhat incorrectly or in a misleading way, but it doesn't tell you, like, okay, so what do you do when the full moon is in Leo? So I have my own charts and notes from my own Book of Shadows and Grimoire and all my own studying that I am going to actually print out and tape into these blank front and back covers, because that's information that if I'm working with the moon signs in my magic and planning, I want to know that stuff. So I'm going to print a chart of what the moon in each sign means, or like what the major characteristics of each sign are. I'm going to put my notes for what each moon phase means, because there is an article in the back here that they have provided that someone wrote about the 8 phases of the moon. But I don't work with 8 phases of the moon, I actually work with 9 phases of the moon, and that is what I'm going to be talking about in the moon magic courses that I am preparing to offer. So if you're interested in learning more about how I work with the moon phases and the magic that I attribute to the different phases of the moon, let me know and I will make sure that you get informed when I am launching those courses. It'll be this year for sure, coming up soon, especially now that I've had this kick in the butt to realize, like, wow, all of these things that are getting left out. But I'll definitely be talking about it on my channel, on my Facebook page, facebook.com/cutewitch772, my Instagram @cutewitch772. I will be announcing those, all of my social media, when they're done. But yeah, so they do give some of that information, and I went through and I underlined some things that I agree with, and I underlined some things that I don't agree with. And yeah, so I'm going to put my own meanings in the back and my own meanings in the front so that I have that reference. But that's something that I would have expected to be in something like this. And that can all sound really technical. Not a lot of people are even interested in working with the moon in those ways, and that's fine. So some people might look at this and not really care about most of these things because they don't care what sign the moon is in or whatever. They don't use that in their magic anyway. So that's fine. So I'm not saying that this can't work for some people the way it is. But from my point of view, there's a lot missing I would need to already have that in here for this to be a perfect purchase for someone like me. Last couple things that I want to mention. Firstly, I mentioned that right up in the front, it lists the dates for the lunar and solar eclipses for the whole year. So that information is there at a glance. And also in the at a glance section of each month, it talks about whether or not there's an eclipse. So in the January, it says the January 1st full moon, the January 16th moon, the January 31st full moon total lunar eclipse. It mentions them there, but it doesn't actually mention them at all in the actual weekly view. So here on January 31st, we see that the moon is in Leo, the full moon is at 8:27 a.m., and it doesn't say right here that it is a lunar eclipse that day. Down here in this little tidbit section, it says that January 31st is a blood red moon eclipse, but it doesn't list that in the weekly view, which I just thought was weird. Like, if you're going to list a bunch of stuff in there, why would you not list the eclipse right in the weekly view? It's only in the front and in the at a glance section. Same thing here. It says July 27th, total full moon lunar eclipse. Gives you some little facts about how often eclipses occur. But then when you go to Friday, July 27th, it just says full moon and what time. It doesn't mention right here that it's an eclipse. So if you're just going through week by week, not looking at the whole monthly glance, you might not realize that. Speaking of the monthly glance, this is the other thing that really surprised me. The monthly view on the calendars has no moon signs listed, which this is probably the most absurd thing that I thought, because even a store-bought calendar, this is a dollar store pocket calendar, even this has the little symbols for full moon, dark moon, first quarter, third quarter, like the major moon phases. A basic wall calendar that you can get at a dollar store that everybody hangs on their wall, most of them have those little symbols. So especially a planner that is meant to be working with the moon signs, that has partial information on every single day, I just don't understand why they didn't also put the symbols of the major, at least when the full moon and dark moon, and first quarter and last quarter. I don't expect all of the individual symbols to be there, but the basic ones that are on every single calendar, I was very surprised are not in this. It does account for daylight savings time. As I mentioned, some of the tables that I found online do not automatically calculate for daylight savings time, so you have to do that yourself. But there are also some ones, like I said, that are already in Eastern Standard Time. There are ones that already have daylight savings time accounted for because people have already done this work and put it on their websites, so you can find it easily online. But yeah, so for me to use this for the type of work that I expect to be able to do with it and with my moon magic, there are a lot of changes that I have to make to this item to make it work for me. I have to add in the times that the moon enters the next sign. I have to note when the solar eclipses and lunar eclipses are in the weekly view. I have to put in my moon phases, the major moon phases. You have to look them up and put them on the monthly view yourself. You know, it's just, it seems like a lot of extra work to do for something that you want to just pay money for to have ready for you. Like, that's supposed to be the convenience of it. Because otherwise, why not just go buy this from the dollar store? It's got 2 years worth in it, and you have to write in all the information yourself anyway, so, you know? And again, I already know the definitions of a lot of the things that they're giving in here, so I know that they're not full or correct definitions. They're either incorrect or incomplete definitions of a lot of the stuff that they're giving. But a true and total beginner picking this up off the shelf at the witchy shop because someone said, this is a great resource for starting to work with moon magic, might not already know those things. And so while I hope that we all always encourage people to do research on their own and everything like that, I've already made the point that when you're purchasing something like this, you want to trust it. You want to be able to trust it and know that it is actually teaching you, that it is being an educational resource. And I have some qualms about that with this item the way it is right now. If any of you have an earlier edition of this, if any of you have worked with this before, please let me know your experiences in the comments, what you think is great about these, what you think is maybe not so great about these. What have your experiences been with them? Because as I said, this is my first time really looking into one in depth, and I'd love to know your experiences because our experiences are going to be different. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Lauren, again for gifting me this item. It's really given me a kick in the butt to get working on my moon phase magic courses so that we can all get started working on those. Please make sure you're following me on social media so you find out when I'm launching new things, and I will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.